Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt. We're cutting through the matrix. I try to show you on this particular show how the big system works together, and it really does work together internationally. Has been for a long, long time in an international system. And I've gone through many of the books in the past of the big players, at least the people who helped to get this system really going into the next phase, which we've all been living through for years, going as far back as the beginning of the 1900s, actually since even the 1880s, when H.G. Wells was writing his first book, and it was free love. Free love he was to promote to destroy families. He wrote about it in his own biography. And the whole plan was set up to bring in a governmental system run on scientific socialism. It's also called Fabianism, a Fabian society. Fabianism really is a form of collectivism or communistic rule by bureaucracy and government. But there will be an intelligentsia above them really running the show. Lots of workers down below running everyone's lives, because that was a Fabian society. Instead of simply having a revolution and taking it over by one big push, they thought it was much better to use incrementalism over a long period of time, little change by little change, and we accept the little changes and we adapt to them. Rather than have a whole bunch of changes, drastically changing all at once, like a revolution, you do it incrementally. And they thought it would take maybe 100 years before government was in its full position of total authority. And they also said they would set up services that would become authorities over the public. It's no coincidence for all this hype today with the United Nations, with their World Health Organization pushing for mandatory global inoculations. Because if you go into the League of Nations, set up at the end of World War I, that was part of their mandate then, to have the right to forcibly vaccinate everybody on the planet with whatever they decided to use. Nothing is here by chance. And sure enough, big players again, like Wells, like Lenin, and like Lord Bertrand Russell, the Huxleys, many others, all said it would probably take, as I say, 100 years. By the millennium, they said, around that time, they'd really kick off for the final push, and everything would be in place by then, which it certainly was. Most of us don't get much of a history at all. If we do, it's a fake history or an altered, distorted history, but primarily it's history with vast omissions written in them. If you don't get the whole story, you can't have a proper conclusion on anything, and we never get the whole story on anything. And we've been trained, as Skinner said, in the Skinnerian psychology, behavioral psychology, without even knowing we've been trained that way, because we adapt again so easily to everything that comes our way. Skinner said if you want to alter the behavior of peoples, you just alter something in their environment. And I've gone through before how when the radio first came out, that altered people's behavior. They'd rush home to hear serials, ongoing serials. They'd always left you with a cliffhanger so you'd tune in the next day. And if you weren't listening to that radio, you'd be off doing something else, you see. And then because you're now listening to that radio, they can also put propaganda in there. And then now everyone's getting the same propaganda, standardized across the board, same propaganda. Then TV came in, of course, fantastic tool. And the British Commonwealth countries really took the lead on propaganda because they'd been at it so much longer in other areas, even through the printed media. That's why the BBC is owned by the government. It's a crown corporation, as they call it. And everyone in it, I don't know if it's still the same, but everyone who works in the BBC had to come from Eton. All the technicians, writers, and so on, to make sure that it was kept in the right class. Which just made me wonder why they put on these working class comedies like Eric Sykes and things like that, to portray what they saw of us, something we could communicate with or identify with. And really it was all, again, propaganda and indoctrination, primarily through comedies. In Britain, for instance, right now, and we've seen this comedy system being used for attacking the family unit in America as well, because America copies everything that Britain does, where every dad is an idiot, an absolute child actually, where his own children are smarter than him. He's always playing childish games, and his wife is so much superior than himself. You get messages across through comedy because, again, you're not critically thinking about it as you would be with a documentary. And even with the sexual variations we've gone through today, with preferences and all the rest of it, that was again put through comedy. That breaks the ice, you see. And they're going for the last leg of this in Britain by using really awful supposed comedies with the dads that are drunks and addicts and so on, and still calling them comedies. And here's the Daily Express, Thursday, July the 23rd, 2009. And this will come here too. It says, thousands of the worst families in England are to be put in sin bins in a bid to change their bad behavior. And this is the Goring, I'd call him, the Goring, or Himmler maybe, of Britain, Ed Balls, announced yesterday. This guy's a real control freak. The Children's Secretary, this is what he is, set out £400 million in plans to put 20,000 problem families under 24-hour CCTV supervision in their own homes. Do you know it was about 20 years ago the American Psychological Association said that would come? Because they would push for it to come. You think it's all chance it comes? We're living through a script, I tell you. We're living through a script. Every part is written years and years in advance. And we've all got used to the idea now that cameras are in the streets watching us, so why not put them in your homes? Right? It says they'll be monitored to ensure that children attend school, go to bed on time, and eat proper meals. Private security guards will also be sent round to carry out home checks, while parents will be given help to combat drug and alcohol addiction. Around 2,000 families have gone through these family intervention projects so far. Well, it kept that quiet. But ministers want to target 20,000 more in the next 2 years, with each costing between £5,000 and £20,000, a potential total bill of £400 million. It's amazing how we're all broke, but they can throw money out in these plans, eh? Ministers are just politicians. But it's interesting they call them ministers, isn't it? In this strange crown democracy. Ministers hope the move will reduce the number of youngsters who get drawn into crime because of their chaotic family lives, as portrayed, listen, in Channel 4 comedy drama, Shameless. Shameless is the name of the drama. Sin-bin projects operate in half of council areas already, but Mr. Balls wants every local authority to fund them. He said this is pretty tough and non-negotiable support for families to get to the root of their problem. There should be family intervention projects in every local authority area because every area has families that need support. But Shadow Home Secretary Chris Grayling said, this is all much too little, much too late. Who created that culture, that nihilistic culture? I lived through a good part of that culture when they were doing it. I can remember Margaret Thatcher coming on television and telling the country, there's a generation growing up now that will never see work in their lifetime. Get used to it. And I can remember, too, when Maggie Thatcher changed the hours of the pubs opening and closing to get more and more youngsters in there with their welfare checks. And the reason she gave was, it's far better to have them drunk and spending the government's money in the pubs than have them rioting or protesting on the streets. And no one told the British people that they were going through a pre-planned forced deindustrialization project set up so it'd be ready to amalgamate with the European Union. When was that decided? That they deindustrialize at the end of World War II. But this didn't tell the people. They lived through depression after depression. Mind you, there was no problem getting drugs. They flooded into the country. Flooded. It's only £1 now, apparently, for a line of coke in Britain. £1. And it's maybe £5, £4 for a beer. And all the ads you see on TV too, it's all sports, sports, booze, booze, sports, booze, sports, sports, booze. So they create the problems. They create the unemployments. They make sure the drugs flow in. Then they make comedy shows about it. And they turn around and point to the public and say, look at you, you're all dysfunctional. The people are exactly what they've been made to be.